I think before we start, it'd be really good to get a sort of sense about yourselves, Habitude, how basically, why education? I think that's probably the key thing. I know everybody cares about education, but why you guys?
We've education is kind of what we've done since the beginning, but from very different origins. We can briefly explain like how it started for both of us. But I started as a classroom teacher in a Harris Academy in South London, and then went and worked for a period at Teach First, and then Teach for All. Teach for All is the kind of global grandparent of Teach First that sets up lots of Teach First in different countries, and then worked in software for a bit before running a MAT. And so those last two bits in particular are really relevant for where this next thing that we're working on comes from.
Yeah, and so my origin story of getting into education was I was a solicitor, and I specialised first of all in charity and social enterprise. But as I qualified, the Academies Act came into being in 2010, and my firm had a small education practice and really saw the opportunity, and we did lots of academy conversions. We started forming multi-academy trusts. We were advising government on policy. We were helping with lots of set up. So I got thrown massively into the world of academies at that point in time. And then from there, Ed and I were friends, and we ended up actually setting up a free school together, which opened in 2014. So post 16. Then we helped set up another one. We formed a multi-academy trust above that. Ed was CEO of that trust. I was trustee. And meanwhile, we were looking at all the kind of operational inefficiencies, experiences at MAT level, and thinking there might be a better way to solve them, which is how we ended up with Habitude.
Izzi's missing the part out of the story where she would eat peanuts with Gove and Cummings in her law office as they were sort of working out what the finer points of academization would look like.
Yeah, Gove wasn't there, Cummings was there.
Gove wasn't there. Yeah. Was that a good thing?
Yeah, hard to say. I was young. So academies and that world of things has been really what we've been doing for the last 13 years, and often from the operational side of things. So, and Habitude, as I say, is what we've ended up doing now, and that's a workflow automation platform specifically for multi-academy trusts. So we saw there was real opportunity as trusts grow, as things get so complicated, as you're trying to get all the moving parts within your many schools to sing together and make sure people are doing the right things efficiently, you have visibility of it. We saw there was a real opportunity for software to help trusts to do that really, really cleanly and really well. And that's how we ended up.
So Habitude is like it's like the plumbing kit that connects together the different parts of your MAT. And people are using us for, well, a whole range of things, many of which like surprise us. It's really cool getting to see the things we never thought people would use Habitude to solve, being used to solve it. But often people start with things like HR, finance, governance, facilities, like very kind of keeping the cogs moving stuff. Yeah. But MATs that use us heavily start using us for some front of house things, school improvement, curriculum, teacher development. It's very interesting seeing how people use it.
And that's really, really important at the moment as well, because I always find with it's always the case with the education market, but things are changing all the time. And basically it's probably having that baseline of making sure you understand what your policies are and making sure your processes are firmly sort of cemented within your MAT or within your academies is probably exceedingly important. At least that at least there's an element of some stability there, where all the different policy changes that are happening, I think it makes it very, very difficult, I think, sometimes for MATs and academies.
Definitely. I mean, like as you ride the journey of a MAT that's growing and you see complexity coming for you, hope is not a strategy with dealing with it, because it's going to get worse. And we do sometimes meet MATs that have reached a decent critical mass of schools, but have not really ever thought about the foundations on which the organization's built, how work gets done by whom with access to what information. And it's really hard for them as they kind of think about their next chapter. They're just not set up to bring more in and to do a good job with helping those new schools to do things really well. Other MATs, by comparison, really smartly think about it very early on and lay very clever set of foundations to operate at scale.
Yeah. Although what I would say is it's never too late. And we have mats, even quite big mats that we have worked with or come to, who go, oh God, it's such a mess. And often what we say is, okay, well, you don't need to untangle every part of it in one go. Start with one thing, and actually the process of beginning to untangle even part of your processes and being clear, well, these are the things that are the absolute non-negotiables that always have to happen, that I want every school to be doing in the same way, even if different people are doing it within the school. Just start with one thing, do that. That will start making it clear for you, because there's something in the process of building a process which helps it to become clear, I think, and helps people to understand what they do hold dear when they run things.
Yeah, definitely. You'll relate to this, Nick, as a product manager mind. The thing I think which really unlocks improvement when we work with mats, whether they're very organized or suffering from a slight state of chaos, is just encouraging them to like just get anything out there and then iterate it. And you'll learn so much. You're never going to get the perfect thing, no matter how many roundtables you have with all the relevant stakeholders. As soon as it's out there and it's being used and you see the data coming in around how that workflow works, you're all going to go, oh, wow, we see the path now. And you're going to want to make loads of improvements. Yeah. But as you'll have seen before, like, it's really taking that leap of faith of like, it doesn't feel perfect, we therefore shouldn't put it out. Is really, really difficult for people.
I always say perfection is the enemy of completion. That's my go-to phrase. So just get it out and start using it, and you'll quickly know what's right. That's it. And you've got a process out there in the wild.
Love it. You know, that's going to be the caption now for the top of this. I totally agree. I suppose in some ways the starting point is always the sort of culture and the vision that you want there, I suppose, in the mat and stuff. And then you can tie some of these things into what sort of process will be suitable or what the approach you take anyway. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, really, I suppose, because it always comes down to people, and ultimately people are always interesting, I think, in the culture.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Like maybe the biggest job of the mat right now is to figure out, especially in the face of a pandemic of absence, in the face of really struggling to hold on to teachers, support staff and leadership. The key thing to think about is, how do we make this a really interesting place to work, where we're able to recruit, retain quality teaching, leadership, support staff. That is what the really, really smart mat leaders are getting right at the moment. And we were thinking about this yesterday, just therefore thinking about what sits where within the mat is a really, really important dilemma to really think on. And to not, I guess, approach it too much as a rational problem, but a kind of semi-irrational one of like, if we wanted to create roles that were really exciting for people to come and work in. On the one hand, you might think, well, the mat's like accountable for everything, so we should have a hand in everything happening here, and we can maybe standardize not just operations but curriculum. But does that create a head teacher role which is really enticing for people to come and move into and stay? Maybe, but maybe not. We're plunged into darkness.
Need to put next 10p in. Right. Do you know what though? That's the same with all businesses as well. So you can expand it into all businesses.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it's certainly a really parallel, but yeah, I agree. Edit that.
Amazing.
First one, but
I was thrown by turning the light on.
Sorry, Sarah.
Cool. Well, one of the first things I wanted to sort of talk about, especially seeing, you work with a lot of different mats and so on. And I think there's so much talk at the moment regarding where mats will be, what will they look like in the future, what other changes are going on at the moment, what we're basically potentially coming up to a new government as well in a year's time. Where do you see? I know it's a little bit sort of like, sticking your finger in the air. But yeah, it's so broad. I know it's a horrible question in some ways. But where do you see the future of mats going? What do you think is going to be really important? What should mats be thinking about right now as well to prepare themselves? Because it's like the whole sort of future gazing and future proofing yourselves. What I know it's a broad question, but let's just start on where do you think mats are going to be?
we had a really great conference last week in Birmingham at the CST, and the strapline for the conference was belonging. And I do think that one constant you're probably going to see in the successful mat of the future is a very clear sense of why this mat exists, for whom it's working for, and what the approach is to achieving great outcomes for the children that go to the schools, and therefore fostering amongst leadership and staff like a real sense of, we come to work and we know why we come to this organization as opposed to others. And that's probably not universally true at the moment.
No.
Mats sometimes for very like legitimate origin stories just have never been able to figure out what is the unique why of this organization versus others.
Well, some have almost been formed in opposition of that. Some have almost been formed. I know there are mats I have spoken to who say we're an anti-mat. You know, we're formed in order to protect ourselves from being swept up by another mat. You know, and that, I understand the origin of that. But if you're thinking about, well, what's the value add for our schools and what we're bringing to really support them, it probably isn't giving that va-va-voom for the people working there.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be. It's just. I mean, we just drew the parallel with. These things are not just true of schools and school groups, they're true of any organization. And that's going to be for the successful Matt, I think, knowing like why we exist is going to be just essential. And there are really great examples already for us all to draw on as we figure out the answer for our own Mats. So that's going to be important. We just talked about what work sits where. So if we're clear about the why, how are we delivering it? Where stuff is apportioned and the different ways people are going to approach that is going to be really interesting. Well, already it is. There's huge divergence in answering that problem. And there's also like, Mats are not so new that there's not no data about the outcomes that those different answers to how we apportion out work leads to.
Yep.
But we just talked there about, you might think about it as a sort of talent challenge of, how do we then create roles in this organization that are really exciting for top talent to come and work at, and people then stay? And belonging is a part of that, but the scope of the roles is a really important part of that as well.
That's quite interesting as well, because that, you know, ultimately, obviously, you see all the adverts about people, you know, government trying to bring teachers into the profession. The retention of teachers is also difficult at the moment. And you're right that the Mats, you know, is obvious when you think about it, but you know, I didn't really think that much, but actually Mats have a really big part to play in
Definitely.
the retention and the development of teachers and bringing them on board and making people feel that they want to be a teacher in the first place.
And giving them opportunities, you know, broad opportunities within an organisation that can expand beyond just a school. I think the Mats we work with, we see really good examples of that, where they are thinking about, from the very early point of someone's just been appointed, how are we making them feel part of not just the school they're joining, but actually how are we making them feel part of the Multi-Academy Trust? How are we really sharing what our culture is and what's exciting about being part of this trust and part of something bigger? And I think I can think of good examples of where trusts really are thinking about that. And that's, as you said, that's best practice in recruitment and retention in any industry. That's not just teaching, but it's easy because it can be, you know, recruitment and teaching can be such an administrative hassle because there's so many compliance things and regulatory things that have to be met, that sometimes that can be the focus and the other kind of surprise and delight parts of recruitment can be missed out. But I think good trusts are really thinking about that now.
Well, we give examples, actually. I mean, I think it's when I joined teaching at Harris School, and Harris was not as large then as it is now, but it was already big. We went and we stayed in a golf hotel for the weekend as NQTs, and you know, it was really impressive. But what's interesting now is that we're working with Mats of much smaller size than Harris, sub 10, actually, the example I have in my head. And they're a sub 10 Mat of primary schools, and they are organizing a really, really impressive Mat Day. I can't remember the official name of it.
Oh, it's like Digital Future or something.
Digital
like
Future
that.
Day.
Yeah.
But they've got an amazing roster of speakers and workshops, and everyone's headed to a nice venue for the day. And they're an example of a Mat with a really clear sense of who they are, and then a plan to like unite everyone around that through these big moments together, and like the small detailing as well. But
and not just teachers, that's all staff across the Mat being
the catering teams, facilities, everyone there.
Yeah.
And that's impressive when you're a mat of sub 10 schools. To prioritize that, I think, really speaks to what matters to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in some ways, you sort of go, does government need to basically, the marketing budget needs to go maybe down into the individual mats? Because actually, if you wanted to, so if you cared about children who are most vulnerable in society, then you might go, actually, I'd really like to listen to a marketing piece from Oasis as an example, because obviously Oasis do a lot of work in sort of areas of deprivation and stuff. So it would be interesting to understand, and that might actually make me go, actually, I could be a teacher for Oasis. So it feels like it should be almost devolved down into enabling the mats to basically do their own sort of professional marketing, I guess, or not professional marketing, but recruitment.
Yeah, well, that would be great, and even if it does happen, the mats are going to do it anyway, because the wheel of improvement and optimization is very, very much in motion now, particularly at very ambitious mats. And we see people that are playing roles that have never existed in schools and school groups that are now in situ, and their job is to wake up and think about how to make this mat better. And very quickly they think about, well, how do we recruit and retain really top talent? And then these great ideas start springing up, and they figure out some budget for it. But yeah, it would be great I think, for government to really acknowledge that part of the role mats can play with extra sweeteners would be smart, definitely.
And do you find that it will, more of these sort of, I suppose, business sort of approaches or processes, I guess, going back to what you guys do you think more of these sort of business processes are going to happen in mats? Do you think, they will basically work much more, as other businesses are working? I know they already are to a degree, but it's sort of, it feels like it's forming that way, rather than it all started 100% that way. Am I coming across well?
Yeah.
That way? I don't know. Do you think it's gonna that you're gonna find much more advertising, a lot more sort of promotion, a lot more marketing, a lot more, all those sort of centralized activities at the sort of mat level? Do you feel that more of those business processes are going to come in?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, certainly from mats we're speaking to, we see, as Ed says, new roles existing that didn't exist before, including kind of external communications and marketing type roles, where people are really thinking about that. And in the business processes, you can see, and we've been doing this now for a few years, and you can see even in that time, people are rolling along in that journey. Everyone's at slightly different stages, and you've got people that are just beginning to kind of tie things together, maybe using things like Power Platform or something like that, just playing out with processes and automation. The other end of the scale that kind of trying to do it in a really big, all-in kind of SAP type way. And then you've probably got people trying things like Habitude, where you're trying to do something really contextual for your mat that feels quite tailored for the sector.
And I think that the mat is going to do, I mean, to your original question of what does the mat of the future look like, the mat of the future is going to have figured out where all the areas in marketing and comms would be two examples. Business processes would be others, definitely, where all the areas we can really add value, and where the school would reflect, we could never have done that on our own. That's just way more sophisticated or time intensive or needs expertise we don't have access to. And so the school will conclude at the end of the year, I feel like we got really good value from the relationship with the mat. And the mat can feel like, we sort of left the school to do the things that really should sit locally in the school. And we feel like we really added value, and things happen more quickly, reliably, with more sophistication. The journey that you started, a lot of people use us for onboarding staff. Those first impressions that schools have been able to give with the resources they've got available have not always been perfect. And you see some mats now making a really good job of that onboarding journey. And so if you're joining the mat, the impression you're getting sometimes in really well thought through experience, it's like really, really impressive. And you might go into school in September and be like, wow, I'm joining a very sophisticated setup here. And hopefully schools will go, yeah, that's brilliant value being brought to us from the wider org. So yeah, I think that on the quest to add value, the mat is going to call in at every single vertical within the organization and figure out, what do we leave, what do we support with, what do we take, and but the range of answers is very hard to predict. But people are definitely, they'll be the questions that they're asking.
Yeah, no, I did one of these fireside chats with Rowena from Astria, who I know you guys know as well, and that it sort of seemed to make sense to me in the sense of her vision of, let's just take away all those sort of business processes away from the schools and allow them to do what they're really, really good at, which is teaching kids, and actually let's take away all the other pressures that we possibly can. And I think that's quite a nice, what a great vision in some ways. Let's go back to what's important for a Matt. And number one should always be about how do we support the kids. If that's the most vulnerable, it doesn't have to be on grades, but it's about getting the most out of making sure the child exceeds their expectations, maybe on themselves. But I just quite like that sort of type of that philosophy. I guess it doesn't mean it's right for every Matt. I think you're right. Other Matts will have different sort of visions, but yeah, that sort of type of principle I think is quite nice.
Yeah. The just to like celebrate the divergence that we already have, probably gonna still see in 10 years time. I can't remember what the research was, but people trying to figure out, like, do Matts make a difference? And this actually may have been about schools, like what type of schools really boost the value add for students. And the answer was, it actually doesn't really matter so much what is your vision and how you're implementing that. The most important ingredient is that you have one.
Yeah.
Like, you know what you stand for and be converting that into everyday actions that impact the classroom and what goes on in them. That is the most important thing. Exactly what that genome is secondary to just having something, which I thought was really interesting and like plays really nicely in, I think, to the new Ofsted framework, which kind of goes in and expects to see that, like, why do you exist? What do you want the children to do after school? How's that implemented in English on a Tuesday afternoon?
Oh man, do you know the thing is, as we work with business, look, we always say about businesses, everything. You need to understand your why. You need to understand, because everybody, ultimately, people look at you from an emotional perspective. They always look at you to understand what's important to you, and I think you need to have that sort of, from a Matt to anybody, you need to have a bit of a brand on your sleeve telling you what's important and what's not important. The way you behave is effectively the same. So yeah, no, I agree. I think the why is very, very, very important for everybody. Amazing. The one thing I always find interesting though is and it might be the way that Matts have grown and the fact they're basically taken on different schools, and it's and I know schools aren't necessarily always that great at using the Edtech they may have bought, sometimes for many different reasons. Are they busy? Yeah, they're really, really busy. So getting the most out of Edtech is not necessarily their number one priority, even though sometimes you might be missing out on additional value. So sometimes it's definitely well, in most cases actually, this Edtech companies, I always think, at the end of the day, it's their responsibility to make sure that everyone gets the greatest level of value. Do you find that still the case? Do you feel that basically Matts still are either have within the schools software that they're just not using really, or they're not making the most of, or do you think they're the other? This is going to sound a bit critical, and I don't mean to be, but I think sometimes there's not really a strong strategy around the Edtech that they use. What's your sort of take on that?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a straightforward yes.
I mean, the biggest gap in Edtech is probably the gap between what seems really exciting in the procurement room when the providers are pitching to the leadership team of the Matt, for instance, and the feature set just, it's like, yes, I'm sure everyone can like violently agree, we need that and we need that. And then the gap between that and then what a year on or 2 years on is implemented in the Matt will be almost always huge. And I mean, it's you have the reality check for, and it's super hard for software providers right now, because the reality check of all of that diversity that we just talked about in Matts, their vastly different origin stories, how that plays out and how they are structured, the ways in which their culture and ethos is impacting their everyday processes, trying to deliver features within your platform that map to the myriad of different practices out there is nigh on impossible. And so it sounds great in the procurement room. When you then try and put it into practice, you're like, It doesn't quite work because we have this kind of weird nuance of our structure. And if only it could ping pong like this in the approval chain, then it would work. And they go back and they ask, could it ping pong like that? And, it's impossible for, if you're an MIS, for you to say, you can't say yes to everyone. And so you're just trying to find the average path with that feature. But I think often things are left unused on platforms because it just doesn't quite fit the way that the mat needs to do it. And the mat needs to do it often for like very legit reasons.
Well, the origin of so many, every mat has come about slightly differently. So the setup is always so unique. That was a huge part when we were setting up, that we were aware of, that the solution for mat A is not going to be the same solution for mat B. And therefore you need to have a set of building blocks that can be put together in the right configuration for the mat so that they can get the most out of their systems, because that's what we hear from so many. I have all these systems, I have too many systems, I don't want another one, but I just need to get more out of them. I want to get my data in and out. I want things to be mirroring my structure, and there isn't a one size fits all, so you need something to kind of help it fit all.
Yeah.
Do you find that maybe frameworks aren't the right thing to do? Again, it kind of, I feel like I'm leading the jury a little bit, if I'm being honest. But there's this sort of sense where, I think sometimes there's so many things that you need from a mat needs, and I think there's certain things that just sort of doing a tick box exercise. So we'll go, does it do behavior? Yes, it does. Does it do attendance? Yes, it does. Does it do X, Y, and Z? HR systems will be the same, and all the other sort of management tools will be the same, and same with even learning tools as well. It's all like, does it do X? Yes. And because you're right, they all do it a little bit differently, or they might do it a little bit, or they might even do some things the same. But you sort of go, forget about what people were doing, or what systems that, what Edtech is doing in whatever system you're looking for. What about just first of all looking at what your needs are? And do you think mats do enough of that?
I think mats are just figuring out how to think about infrastructure. And we do a workshop on this to try and sort of reframe for mat leaders their role as people that bounce from procurement exercise and like buy solutions to problems, to that of thinking about, we're building something that's got to solve lots of problems, some of which we know now, some of which will only become clear later. And the decisions we make now, though, need to stand up for both the things in front of us and the things we haven't yet seen. And it's a different mindset, because it moves you away from finding an individual solution to every problem you've got, because you realize through thinking in an infrastructure sense, that is not the same as solving all the problems that you are going to encounter over the next 15 years. And so we often, with mats, when we work with them, we try and help them identify like what's their type. So we sort of ask them, like, are you a kind of one system to solve it all type of mat? Are you a different system to solve every problem type of mat? Or if you're thinking in a more infrastructure way, you might have picked a few systems to solve everything. So you've made a couple of really smart strategic choices, and the way in which you are tying those systems together is capable of solving what you see now, but will also stand up 5 years from now when you encounter a whole new wave of problems. So I guess getting you out of that, like just putting one of everything in the shopping trolley in the Edtech aisle at the supermarket, because you end up with systems abundant, but not really sure how they work together, and actually often feeling like they don't even solve the stuff that you bought them to solve in the first place.
Yeah, and I feel there's an element of going back to that, like you said at the beginning, the sort of why or the strategy. What do you want to achieve? What is part of your, if you're a school, what's your school improvement plan? What's your, or Matt as a Matt strategy? What is your strategy? And don't jump to a supplier just because, I don't know, they might be nice, or you might go, well, they fulfill most of the criteria. So understand what your strategy is, and then you can go, actually, what we need is, I don't know, we want sustainability is really high up on our list. What are these suppliers going to do for me on sustainability? And that's not about features. That's about, like you say, I think going back and saying, who do you want to work with? What type of companies do you want to work with?
And knowing what the questions are to ask people, right? Like, one thing we are always sharing with mats, whether we work with them or not, is we share a standard set of wording to include in any RTT about APIs and getting your data in and out of a system, because so many mats are so frustrated when they can't get their data in or out, but they never thought to ask the question in the first place when they were procuring the system. So it never occurred to them up front that that might be something that they could or couldn't do. They're only now using it and realizing and getting really frustrated if they can't. So they'll say, oh, I want to go out and buy again, but aren't even sure what exactly they should be asking for. So sometimes just help to understand what it is, articulating what it is they need is helpful.
Oh,
yeah.
That leads me to another really quick question to the side. Do you think basically all systems should be open? Because the data is the mats. So do you think all of them should be open?
Yes.
Data open.
Yeah, would be the I mean, if it's there are like, beyond the sort of type, what type are you diagnosis, there are 5 things that we ask mats that are looking to become more infrastructure centered versus like platform centered, and that is, where are you going to store your student data, i.e. what's your MIS, where are you going to store your staff data, where are you going to store your finance data, what's at the core, basically Google or Microsoft, and then what workflow solution is going to help you move stuff around that network of data repositories to get the everyday work done. And the answer is obviously Habitude or Power Automate or Zapier, one of the workflow solutions. But those 5 questions will move you from thinking about a platform to solve an immediate problem. Don't think about how are we going to manage absence, because there'll be features on every HR platform that say the word absence in them. But think about a really good store of your staff data that has great APIs to get information in and out. And then you can, with that, figure out what's the smart way for this mat and the way that we want to solve it to solve absence. But it is definitely a different way of looking at the world.
Wow. And Ed, why did you say about your competitor?
Once you've tried all 3, you know what makes sense, Nick.
Okay. Oh, that's okay. The confidence then. Oh, superb. Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's also a play for the the Edtech companies need to work, I think, closer. There's sometimes I find they don't really. We always have this thing about make everything frictionless. That doesn't mean it has to be tech. It can be people as well. But the idea is, enable people to understand from the point of awareness who you are and what you do and what you believe in, all the way through to the value that they bought into and then you supplied. That should be frictionless. So it should be easy to understand the value and people gaining the value. I'm not sure personally if all EdTech companies they feel like their product is their product and they don't think about the full solution around it really, and all the potential partnering with you, making sure that you guys fully understand what they do and what they can deliver, so you basically can then enable that within the processes within the mats. Is that something you find you find within the mats as well?
Well, certainly from supplier perspective, I think that's changing a bit now. I mean, Ed mentioned we were at CST. It felt like we had great conversations with loads of mats. We also had great conversations with lots of suppliers who do now understand a bit more how workflows can really enhance what they're doing without them having to do everything themselves, and how their customers can get much better value out of them with being able to integrate with others.
When we first launched Habitude, we were trying to figure out what do we, workflows is what we would have always referred to as being at the core of a system like Habitude, your processes, but automated and plugged into a platform. It's a workflow, but what do you call that 2 years ago when that's a completely new concept, and automation is also a new concept? I can't remember what we called it actually. I think they were called habits, which is why we're called Habitude.
Yeah.
We changed it to workflow because in the space of the last 2 years, the workflows really entered the public consciousness of people running mats. And so now go to a workshop at CST, you'll hear the word workflow freely mentioned by mats up there on stage, walk around suppliers, and everyone's aware of this new requirement in the system, which is that work doesn't happen on any one platform. It's always cross-cutting, almost always anyway. And the mat now expects that to be facilitated by platforms in sync with each other, making it happen for them with their data. And workflow has become the way in which we all describe that, not just suppliers, but people running mats as well, which is convenient for us because it's just, we get to now call it what it is. But that's a really interesting change we've seen. I mean, it's like a good end to a headache that we had 2 years ago. We can now just describe what we offer in the terms that it is, but that's quite interesting. So something clearly has started to move on in the minds of people running these organizations.
There you go. You've changed culture as well.
It's definitely like, it's correlation, not causation. I don't think we can lay claim to that being behind that.
We can.
Cool. And obviously based in the fact we're all in EdTech and stuff, what would you like to see change? What things would you, again, for the purposes of improvement for mats and for education and for academies, because that's what we all should be believing in, and this is why we all work in this sector. So what would you like to see from EdTech if you basically had a chance to, and as you have, hopefully, to talk to lots of people in EdTech? What would you like to see change? What would you like to see companies do better?
We have touched on it. I'll just really repeat the point that Izzy made a minute ago, which is like the number one thing that we could all do to allow our customers to create really great solutions for their schools would be to, by default, have a great API that is well documented, that follows standard modern conventions, and that customers, that we advertise, but also that is as available as we advertise it to be. That customers don't need to ferret around to try and find once they are a customer. Like it's just there. Other providers can go on the website and put up the documentation and play. That would be game changing. And we've seen that in initiatives like open banking have proved to be really transformative for the range of ways in which us all as like customers of the banking sector can now solve budgeting problems, or with these clever apps. It's all possible because the banks have aligned on how information can flow between themselves. So that would be the number one thing. And what's really great with that, to echo the point around last week and talking to other suppliers who are excited about doing that, that's a really concrete way for us all as suppliers to work together. And it's easy for us to have. We have plenty of Zoom calls amongst everyone's like, it's all smiles and it's great, and we're all pushing in the same direction. But this is a really concrete thing that we can work on together, and I'm sure will lead to lots of other little concrete things we can work on together as well. So I would just, it's a big endeavor. So, but that would be if we had a magic wand, that would be the big thing that we would change.
And do you think it needs to be open APIs, or do you think there needs to be like data pools? I know at one point, like the DfE were trying to get towards a big data pool. I think the only problem is that, what information is in there, what's not in there. It becomes a bit of a big project that I don't think probably why it failed really to a large degree.
Yeah, we always advocate against the concept of data lakes, which was super fashionable 5 to 10 years ago. I think they've fallen out because the world of really well-built APIs, workflow tools like Habitude, allows you to work in a much more sophisticated, like just-in-time way, where as and when data is needed, at the moment it's needed, it's grabbed, moved along, and put into the right place. And that kind of the need for these huge repositories of data sort of falls away at that point. And they're really hard to manage. You spend years trying to work out what should be in the lake. How do we build the lake? Then building it. And then once it's all in there, you realize like, oh, we're missing some data, or what do we do with it? Got a lake full of data. I'm not sure how to analyze it.
So you're asking companies to basically work alongside the single project, which is that there is no real strong vision apart from we have all the information in one place.
Yeah. I mean, that said, there are exercises the DfE is running which are really, really valuable that I think they could go even further with. I think it's April time when MATs submit their standardized budget to the DfE. So however you view it internally, it's like translated into the DfE chart of accounts and sent across. That's really interesting. And the DfE does do good stuff with that data, like the financial, can't remember what they call it, like benchmarking tool is really, really cool and powerful. What else could be done with that data? I think it's really interesting. That's really really great data for suppliers trying to work out what matters to schools and maths. Well, what matters is where their resources will be being allocated. So are there ways to help suppliers to in a more cross-cutting way, see where resources being allocated? That would be fascinating.
I think data, having all the data available and cutting that data, no matter where it comes from, can produce so much great analytics. The simple thing is, if you have the financial information, the personnel information, and assessment information, you can easily just sort of go, well, you understand where maybe for some teachers there's some support needed, or it could be actually there's some excellent teachers on a great budget and actually maybe they should be paid more, or there's lots of analysis that can be done based on cutting a lot of data that at the moment probably resides into lots of sort of siloed areas. I always talk about this sort of, it'd be brilliant if you can basically you have a child with the same demographic as another child in, say, I don't know, I'm in London, and I've basically got a child within the same sort of demographic as somebody up in Liverpool, and there's basically this, there's these concerns, and then these interventions have worked, and there's one in Liverpool and one in Newcastle. And again, it's not because you're telling the teacher what to do. You're basically saying, by the way, there's these interventions that worked really well in these different types of schools or maths or with this teacher or whatever it might be. You might want to consider it. And so again, the data is basically supporting teachers far more and giving them more choice, and giving them sometimes the latest sort of statistics regarding some of those interventions or whatever it might be. But and I'm only saying it that way in the sense of the data being so open that actually some of those trends and analysis can work. It's like when you hear about, I think there was one math or a school where they basically identified this child only, they're having bad grades of maths. Normally they're really good, but they had to, on this Tuesday when the math lesson was in the morning, they were basically helping their siblings get to school, and they basically missed their own bus. So what they found out at the school was, then they basically helped them buy a bike, sort of thing. And it's sort of, it doesn't have to be about, you need to put this child in this particular room or this particular place, and obviously that helps, but it's just that wider concept of what data can sometimes bring, I think is really important.
And I think we see at this point we see fewer of those examples just because of what people build on us, but more, I think, equally interesting examples of where the policies that you have as an organization to help manage some of the big ticket items like absence, how many MATs can hand on heart really say, we see this policy that handles unplanned absence successfully applied in X% of cases. It would be very difficult, I think, for many MATs to be able to identify what X was there. And so to step back into the world of, you're clear where your data is, you have workflow tools that enact those policies for you every day and kind of keep the work moving automatically on behalf of the support staff teams. One of the really interesting byproducts of that is that surfaces very interesting performance data about how successfully that work is moving through those pipelines to completion. And maybe for the first time, you can identify what is X in the case of unplanned absence. How successfully do we complete that policy? And the person's back at work, having had the meeting with their line manager, and the piece of paper is in the right folder. And from there, you can improve it.
Yeah.
But it's really hard without the right tools and measurement in place to just work out what the starting point benchmark is for you.
Yeah, because if you're not performing, why aren't you performing? Is it a problem with the application of the policy, or is it a problem with the policy in the first place? And as you say, if you don't know how it's being applied, you don't know whether it needs improving or not.
Yeah. And actually, in some ways, I suppose, again, it comes back to the support. If you understand other MATs and what they've been doing in as far as their policies, and are they aligned to your vision, going back full circle to what we talked about at the beginning, then again, we all need support sometimes, don't we? So we all need, if we all know where good practice is happening or whatever it might be, or even just slight improvements, it comes back to that, David Brailsford 1% marginal gains. If you can make those sort of small tweaks to your own policies or your own MAT, or and if you can then show a positive retainment or absence reduction in absence, then that's where we all need to get to, is those little small percentage changes.
And it's one thing, now that we've been going for a while and we've had quite a few mats using us, we've just launched a template library so that we can actually take some of the workflows people have already built as a starting point for people. Within it, it's really, really easy to edit the workflow to suit your context or to iterate to improve it as you are out there using. But it means that people aren't completely starting from scratch always, and some of the more common processes that people run and are getting the benefit of what other mats have already learned and improved. We have some of the commentary from the mats that have used it within there so that they can start sharing some of that practice and learning as they go.
I mean, actually, we probably held back probably just for the thing that we haven't talked about, which is really interesting, and this is not a Habitude point, although Habitude obviously by its nature fully embraces this.
Yeah.
But the potential of automation across mats and schools is absolutely amazing to not only the like improvement possibilities are great, but the possibility to give back huge chunks of resource is we think the next big opportunity for schools to move on up to a new ledge, I guess, of what they can deliver to their pupils, because you're in terms of what you can get back in like time and resource, it's really, really, really very material. In the best cases, we see the same work being done, but for 10% of the resource that it used to cost to do it traditionally. That's amazing. And the people that did that work, they're not redundant. We've not seen a single example of that, actually. They are redeployed into things that everyone in that mat would say, this is high value.
Yep.
But what you used to do, and they would agree, we have administrators saying, oh my God, thank God. I hated the repetitive nature of that piece of work through that process. Drove me nuts. But what they can now do is go out there and deliver the high value touch points with pupils or parents that really improve the work at the schools. But yeah, through automation, you have this chance, and it won't be quite as efficient in every single case, but doing the same work, but for 90% less of the resource is just an amazing opportunity for mats to step into.
And the thing is, everyone sort of gets a bit scared about automation, but the fact is, most mats are under resourced. Most schools are under resourced. So all this is doing is making sure that actually are focusing on the important stuff. The really high, as you said, the most high value things within the school or the mat, rather than it's not nothing to do with that we can reduce down our the number of people or employment within this mat.
Well, I always say we automate the things that make sense to automate, the things that no one is precious about, like the sending of the email, the updating the data into the spreadsheet, the putting data from one system into another system. That's not glamorous. It doesn't take brain power. It just needs doing, and it is prone to human error if you leave it that way. We automate that stuff. The other stuff, the stuff that requires human thinking and brain and intelligence, that's still for people. They still play a really valuable part in any process. But just take the kind of the high volume but repetitive stuff off them.
Big style. No, I'm all for that. I hate repeating the same stuff. But yeah, for sure. And automation in other markets is all there. It's happening all the time. People are always looking for efficiencies, and we should all look for efficiencies, and that sort of thing, for sure. Well, I'll tell you what, it's amazing speaking to you, and a really big thank you for your insights. I think people are going to find it really interesting to understand some of the things you've been talking about. I definitely and I don't normally do it this way, because I know we always stay sort of very independent about things, but I think people really do need to talk to you about automation, because it's so important, and enables you to then to be more flexible about the other things you need to do within your mat, like you say, the high value pieces in your strategy. Don't get people to maximize and all the brains that you have within the mat or in the schools. So I think it's really important. So yeah, my takeaway is definitely speak to you about how things can be changed from a cultural perspective, but also from that sort of policy and procedure.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the call up. We're long-time fans of the Fireside. So.
A big thank you, and yeah, absolutely, and speak to you soon for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nick. Right, Nick. Take care. Bye.
All the best.